previous days, and the organizers, have gone through a lot of these things, and so we're here to basically answer your questions and raise other points of importance that we think are relevant to you guys. So, so I just put a few bullet points. We just jotted down now, and I'll show you a couple other slides that I prepared for something else just to start the discussion. But so the so career paths. Obviously, one important question is: are you interested in a career in something involving quantum materials? Is it in a university setting, academia? Are you looking at industry? What are the options there? National labs and so on. We could talk about details about where do you start when you get to this point, if you're lucky enough to make it through the process of a career path to a faculty position or something equivalent. How do you build a lab? Like, what do you start thinking about? The same goes for setting up a research program. How do you recruit people, graduate students, postdocs? How do you get funding? How do you manage your time? These are all things that typically you don't really think about until you get there and you're forced to. You learn the hard way. And so at least part of this discussion is just to give you some guidance on what to think about or to keep in mind about this career path. Okay? So let me start just by this. So I gave this talk to new faculty. So NSF has a workshop each year for new faculty. And so I gave this talk this past June. So the secrets of success in science, everybody wants to know this. The secrets, how do you do well? Right. How do you get funding? Yes?
Quick question, was this workshop for physics or?
It was DMR, so it was NSF Division of Materials Research. So physics and a few other related things. There was about 60 faculty there, junior faculty. So I'll go through a couple things, and then please, I'll just put your hand up, ask questions. There's a lot of senior people in the front here, and there's a few in the back. Jason's in the back, Javad. And there's some grad students around. So, please, I want this to be an open discussion. So, okay, anyways, here's the first funny thing. There are 2 rules for success. Number 1, never tell everything you know.
Okay, so you think that's true in science?
And it's silly, but in reality, it's a competitive world, and that does not escape us in physics and quantum materials. Especially, let's say you grow crystals, you find some new phenomena. You have to be careful. You don't want someone to swoop you and steal your thunder, because you want to take that result and publish it somewhere great, get some funding, and continue the process, the cycle. Anyways. What I really wanted to get to is this one slide where this is just about starting a program. Like I said, if you were lucky enough to get to a faculty position, and you say, go, here's $10 million, go buy equipment and start a research program. So what do you do? Well, it's kind of daunting, no matter how much money they give you, how much time you have, semesters off teaching, and so on. It's still a lot of work. And so I use this small business model as something to think about in terms of you're really running your own small business when you run a research program because of all these things. I won't go through them in detail, but you're managing people, you're managing infrastructure, you have to advertise your results, you have to market yourself and your things, you have products, there's costs, revenue, all this stuff. So very well fits into this kind of model. So just an anecdote to keep in mind when you start thinking about this more seriously in terms of how you run your program. And I would say one of the most important things is people. Right? People run everything. We are people. The students and postdocs you hire are people. And every person is different, right? Are there any twins in this room? Even if you are identical twins, they're still different, right? And you have to treat people differently. So with that, I'll open it up and people ask questions about anything, so please go ahead, yeah.
Can I ask, okay, how important do you think a postdoc position is if you're leaning more towards if you're going into industry as opposed to an academic or national lab technician?
Right, so the question is, how important do you think doing a postdoc position is after graduating from PhD, I assume, for going into a career in industry rather than academia or national labs? Anyone want to?
I have a piece of quantitative information, which is that I think there's an article in Nature Science that says that if your intention is to go to industry, in terms of earning potential, you earn the most if you go straight after your PhD, and every year in a postdoc decreases your earning potential in industry. It's actually negative for your earnings potential.
Yeah, I agree, unless it's maybe directly relevant to that job, you know, where you're gaining experience and it may help you get the job or something.
I would also add to that, of course, I haven't gotten a job in industry either, but from friends, that if you stay too long in a postdoc and then you end up, in quotes, in industry, it's a lot harder because basically hiring managers are weighing whether you actually wanted to, you know, if you're applying because you couldn't get a job elsewhere, or because you know, whether you really wanted to be there in the first place.
Sure.
So it's kind of a little bit difficult maybe because you might feel that if you know you're under pressure to make a decision right when you get your PhD. It doesn't mean you shouldn't consider a postdoc, but you should keep that in mind.
Yes?
Maybe the other way around is okay. Everything is okay, but if you do after your PhD study, if you go to industry, is it okay or it's easy to go back afterwards in academia?
Good question. Is it easy to return to academia? And that, I mean, I would say not only for like at postdoc or post-PhD, but even before that. And it's not uncommon, for instance, in students that apply to graduate school here, for instance, occasionally you see someone that has gone off to Wall Street or something for a year or two and is coming back to try to go to grad school. I mean, that really depends, but I would say it doesn't necessarily help the case. So I'd say, realistically speaking, to be blunt, in academia, people tend to get hired at a younger age rather than an older age. So there's some clock that's running. And that has some impact.
Well, I was just going to say, what about Bell Labs? Wasn't that the case of everyone going from industry into academia?
From Bell Labs to academia? But that's a,
physics department school.
It wasn't really industry.
that was really a research, yeah, I mean, that's
More
kind of
like
a
yeah, it was more like an national
unique time, and that doesn't really exist.
But yeah, I think that's,
Well,
we can't learn from that.
And I think it's more common in engineering to go back and forth from industry to academia than it is in, say, physics or chemistry.
So yeah, if you lose your time, like if you stay away from academia for too long after PhD, you lose your eligibility to apply for early career grants.
Yeah,
Yes,
Age.
yes.
because they count from PhD, that's right.
There's a second part to this too, though. And I was hoping that the people who actually sit on hiring committees would say this, but if you go work in industry, I mean, of course, it depends on what particularly you're doing. But if you're not publishing, that's dead time for you.
Yeah, there's also just basic questions like why, you know, a hiring committee might ask, why do they go to industry, right? What's their genuine interest in this? Yes?
I guess this is probably going to depend for each of you, but generally, what have you seen for your graduating PhDs? How many people actually end up in faculty positions versus go straight to industry or do a postdoc and then go to industry after that, like percentage-wise?
I've only had 4 PhD students, so I don't know if this
About half of my students have ended up in faculty jobs. The biggest If they want it bad enough, they can get it. It's basically how badly you want it. And if you're willing to work hard enough and sacrifice enough, they've all been able to get it. To do that if they want it.
Yeah, I guess it might help to define what academic job means too. It doesn't mean you have to be a professor at MIT.
No, yeah, basic research.
There's a
Doing
whole
basic
range
research for a living.
Yeah. Possibilities, including some small liberal arts schools where teaching is more emphasized, and so on. Places that don't have PhD programs. So there's a whole range of kind of thing. And of course, if you're still interested in doing research in this job, then that will have to scale accordingly. I've had 4 PhD students, and none of them are not that good. So, but that's only 4.
The second part of the question was national labs, whether you need a postdoc or a national lab.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know in this day and age of anybody who's come in and been hired at the national lab who hasn't had at least one postdoc under their belt.
Don't a lot of people go there as a postdoc and end up staying?
So, so anecdotally, I think it used to be more of that. I mean, so when I started at Argonne, quite a few people, including myself, were postdocs and stayed on. Now I'd say that that fraction is smaller, maybe 10%, something like that. This is, I mean, the pipeline is not, there's more postdocs and you know, people stay at the lab until they're like keel over. So the pipeline doesn't empty, unfortunately, and the dollars aren't getting bigger. So.
I think that's true in Los Alamos as well. Or they have more of a reputation of keeping their postdocs.
Could be, I don't know. I mean, maybe it did.
Yeah, I think Los Alamos, if you're a U.S. citizen and you want to work on weapons, and there's a path forward at Los Alamos.
That's different.
Behind the fence.
But, yeah, if you want to just work on basic research and not weapons related, it's still hard to.
It's harder, actually. Right, because money's changing.
Isn't it true even for quantum computing, US the citizenship is required? Like even for quantum
Citizenship?
computing, yeah, research
For where?
Where?
in national labs? No.
I don't think so, I don't think they care.
I know for sure IBM doesn't hire international employees for
IBM doesn't?
IBM doesn't hire.
Really?
I can comment on that a little bit. I had a really good Chinese student who just graduated, and he went to Google hoping to work on superconducting qubits. And there are export laws on certain technologies, and he's not allowed in the lab at all right now. So he's kind of in a gray zone in terms of what he can work on. And I'm sure that there are certain projects at IBM that are the same way. I think places like Sandia, there's a mixture. I see people that are not U.S. citizens who can have some involvement in material data aspects of specific projects. So it really depends on the national lab setting. But I think in the industry, you would be careful at this stage. To just ask that question first, where you get too far in.
Yes.
What are some good ways of advertising, I guess, yourself as a scientist, besides, going to conferences, networking, and, making like a group webpage or something? Is there any other good ways?
Yeah, good question. Sorry?
That was a good question.
It was a good question.
Telling your son to.
Yeah, I mean, you already touched on really the report.
Yeah, but I'm just curious if there's any other good ways besides just doing
So
those.
my opinion would be that networking is a hugely beneficial thing for a lot of these aspects. So for advertising, for instance, and that comes about by going to give seminars, different universities, and meeting people, and starting collaborations, and so on. And so that's in itself advertising your work, but you have to sort of actively do things. It even comes down to the way you present things. You give a talk. What do you decide to show? Do you decide to tease the audience with some published data? kind of thing. There's a bit of a craft. And then networking all, yeah, go ahead.
So, I mean, in an early career stage, it maybe doesn't, but even that's not too soon to be like thinking about like organizing seminars or symposia or something like that at the national meetings, right? To get yourself to be establishing yourself sort of as a leader in the field or a thought leader or something, right? And you know, the fact of the matter is that the quantum materials community is not that big, really. I mean, pretty much everybody knows everybody, and so it's really important that you. What I tell young people is, there's one thing you have to have is your reputation, and don't screw it up. I mean, because if you do, then you're in real trouble. There's just too small of a community to like sort of go over and start again. So your scientific integrity and your reputation is your best calling card.
But are there easy activities to get involved in? Like maybe March meeting?
Yeah, these are kind of, I mean, it's hard to figure out because you have so many things thrown at you, not to mention service, group, teaching, and so on. One of the things that typically happens is as a new faculty, you get thrown into the committee to organize a seminar, speakers, and so on. So you automatically kind of get forced to meet a lot of people coming through your university. So that depends on the place you're at. It might be a small program, it could be big. But you can, yeah, of course, get involved in things like March meeting, organization, or other conferences. That's getting your name known, but getting your work known is another. One other thing I would mention is, you know, don't be afraid to be active in trying to promote your work. Of course, getting it published in the Wall Street Journal or whatever is, you know, is the ultimate. But these days, there's so many news outlets online that if you come up with a fancy graphic, schematic, or something that describes your results, and it catches on somehow, it immediately, you know, gets viral. Yeah, it gets broadcast across all these different web science news sites and so on. That's actually a pretty effective way to
Good graphic can really make a difference.
And most universities have press offices.
Yes.
Yeah, they like graphics.
Yes, sir. Actually, this is something like one of my agenda items is that everybody, this is what ties exactly to this, you should have a really good web page so that when somebody comes, say, oh, like I met this person at a conference, I want to, know a little bit more about him or her, and they Google you. It doesn't have to be like, super web design, but it should really effectively present, your ideas, your work, so that, I met you and I wrote your name down, and I'm like, I want to know more, I kind of want to know more about this. And I go there and there's like nothing. That's bad. Even as a graduate student, you want to start building up your, your information so that if somebody wants to know more about your work, you're putting it out there, right, for them to, that they can really see your, what you want them to see.
So even as graduate students,
Yeah.
you can have a webpage, even if you don't have any publications. Okay. Now maybe not everybody's group has them listed as a member or where you can change stuff, but you can set up like a Google Sites page for yourself, and then it really doesn't matter until you're starting to look for a postdoc, but you can do this, and then this is something that you should think about anyway as you go forward. Maybe what's worse than not having a web page is having one that's 15 years old.
Oh, that's bad.
Yeah.
But I mean, how are they going to have?
They're not. But I mean, think about it when you were looking at graduate school. Did you start looking at faculty pages and wondering whether this person was still in the department? Maybe. Yeah. I mean, now it's not acceptable because everybody who's younger than a certain age is expected to actually know how to do this. It may not directly affect whether you get hired or not, but every little bit helps, right?
Yes.
So I've heard a perennial problem with starting faculty members is attracting graduate students. I wonder if you can comment on how to do that well, especially when your group is just getting going.
Yeah, it's hard, yeah, because graduate students typically want to work with well-known people or, established groups. You have to, I mean, I would say one thing is you have to come up with a good argument for why, when you talk to students, why they would work with you and convince them. And it's got to be a real argument. I mean, the common one is you're going to learn how to build a lab, which may or may not be a good argument for because in their mind they might hear, oh, that means they're going to be bolting equipment together for 3 years. But there's other things you can do. You can get involved in admissions committees, where you get to see a sort of big cross-section of what students are out there and what experience they have, et cetera, who's coming to the school, what they're interested in, personal statements, stuff like that.
Can you give an example of a good argument?
A good, well,
I can do one. I mean, usually the first ones are the best students in any group that you look at. So you can be that first student. So if somebody comes to you, you can say you can be in that kind of group. If you look at most groups, like the senior ones, the first students, because the faculty has more time to interact with them, to work with them, all the knowledge is firsthand. Right? If I learn my MD from my advisor or from like a second-hand thing, it's just a very different quality. And I think that's just one. And it is true that my first student, I didn't have many students, but he's very good.
I think another positive argument I'll make is coming in as a new faculty member, the first students that you bring in can have a big influence on the group. You can be a big part of the project, whereas a very established group might have many grad students and postdocs, and it's much harder for an incoming student to come in and steer the course and have a big influence on a project. So I think you can make an argument that, with the right student who wants to take on the responsibility, they can really steer things and have a big role, more so than someone at a later stage of the career.
One practical thing you could do is year one, teach the first year graduate course. That way all the incoming graduate students get to know you. And save the teaching lead for the spring term. So come in the fall term, do a really great job teaching, and that'll bring in a lot of students who want to interview with you. I did.
Another thing you can do, I think, for students, like, one of the reasons they want to work with someone established is that they want to feel like, they'll have access to networking and, that you'll be able to kind of help them with their careers, so that you can also highlight a little bit your own networking. Like, if you came from a very, if you actually came as a postdoc from a big group in the field, or as a student from, a major group in the field, make sure that they know that, you can let you make sure that they know that, because those are your connections that you'll be using to help your students develop their own networks and their careers. So instead of just being some kind of random low-lying person on the totem pole.
And then so when you go to like the focus meetings, like when we go to our solid state chemistry meetings, they see that they're part of the bigger
Exactly.
network.
That through you, they're actually tapping into, like in my case, the Marvin Cohen, Berkeley family, and that there's a whole, that they're actually going to be connected to many people who are able to help them.
I'll say something. I guess this is just a generic comment. I guess we all know that hyping things and marketing things, and these could be good and then can push us forward. But I think it's extremely important to be transparent and honest about what we present. I mean, we are all in the same game, so when we see talks, we can also decipher it and kind of know exactly what's going on. Like, I've seen like talks that people just advocate or hype it up too much, just with the hope that you can get an edge. Like, people will see exactly what we've done and how much we're enthusiastic about things. For postdocs or faculty jobs or anything else. Don't sacrifice that by adding a lot of toppings. It kind of doesn't matter really in the long run.
Yeah, that's a good point. I should add, like, this comment about making a fancy graphic doesn't mean, that's going to get people reading these web pages excited doesn't mean it's going to get us excited.
Yeah.
But it might draw our eyes. You see something on a university news page or something that gets to, like DOE has little snippets of hot results on the page. It gets people's attention. They suddenly will know that this result exists, this person exists, they're doing this and that. Yeah.
How do you think about research periods, so like managing like market versus competition and kind of what areas of
Research areas in what way? You mean,
like what sort of topics to consider and propose and look at? Because like if your market, like how do you know if there's a market versus if there's too much competition or like balance?
in terms of like choosing what research you want to work on? That's a tough question. I mean, you have to obviously be somewhat knowledgeable about what's going on out there. This is it's a tricky subject because there's obviously hot topics that come up, and they can either be like a flash in the pan, or they could lead to a whole new field of research. Something like bilayer graphene is obviously a very interesting result that suddenly made a splash at the March meeting last year, and most likely it will lead to a new field of research like that was talked about earlier with multi-layers and so on. But there's other cases where something hot happens and people jump in and because they think it's going to grow and it doesn't. It's a bit hard to know that, but I think it is important to keep in mind that doing something that people are interested in, and more important, funding agencies are interested in funding, is something to keep in mind.
I think you skipped over it depends on the level you're talking about. If you're asking what's a surefire way to get money, that's a different question from what are funding agencies interested in funding. And there are actually documents online that you can actually search for them. But reports are written about what priorities are, and you at least want to make sure that you're targeting something there if you're thinking very generally. I don't know how helpful that is, because I think most of the faculty here already know what the funding agencies are interested in. But
Well, it's like being on the bleeding edge,
That's totally right.
These documents and so on are good, but often they're a bit delayed.
Of course. But that's our sense.
Does that answer your question, or?
Just a little bit. I guess one of the things often that we can be really good at it. And I'm really enjoyed, actually Jason told me when I was younger, you want to be like the top 2 in your field if you can be. Right? So if you really like the subject, you shouldn't change because you think something, that's my personal opinion. You don't want to do something that is just looks hot. But if you're really good at what you're doing, you will find ideas, and you may even look on the field that you don't know right now. Right? So just do that something that you're good at it and you enjoy it.
So one model to do that, like what I do is, I'm always working on something that's a bit risky, and maybe it's a hot topic or something, but also something conventional that is a bit more conservative or a bit more guaranteed. And this, it's not only good for one's success, but also you got to consider if you have students and postdocs, you want them to have success as well, to have publications and so on, so they can move on. So having people work on something that may not pan out is risky. You have to keep these things in mind. You had a question? No? Oh, yeah.
So a lot of the time, like academic positions, they would want you to have some previous sort of teaching experience. And for most people, that'd be I TA'd when I was a grad student, and I just did research when I was a postdoc. But what exactly are hiring companies looking for beyond that, or what other things could you get involved in that count as teaching experience to sort of build your resume as a professor who can actually teach classes?
There's a wide range of that, and it ranges from 0 to expecting you to be a really good teacher. So for example, like in my own experience interviewing in places, there was no mention of teaching, to having to give a mock lecture to a hiring committee and pretend I was teaching them about capacitor. So, yeah, there's a range of that. I mean, on average, I would say there's not much expectation, because everybody knows that there's not much training and teaching.
So I have some friends that went into faculty positions at liberal arts in the colleges, and they had to, in addition to doing the research topic or seminar, you have to go in and substitute in and give a lecture. So you have to be on your game for teaching there. R1 institutions, I mean, it may come up in the...
You need to provide teaching statements.
Yeah.
University.
It's a funny thing, yeah, because you suddenly have to be up to speed on sort of modern teaching techniques, to rewrite these statements, to actually have them be appreciated by a hiring committee. But you're not expected to have real experience. But I would say that the important thing really is actually getting experience, because when you suddenly have to teach a course, that it's tricky, you don't know how to do it. There's a lot of tricks to the trade that you may learn by doing TAs and so on, or teaching some substitute lectures. It will be very useful when you actually have to teach. That's really more important.
What about for people who don't want to go?
They work at this.
No, I don't. So is it worth taking time away from research to teach as a graduate student, university?
Well, yeah, I think it hits on the same question. I mean, how much effort do you put into building up your teaching repertoire? Now, the reality is, teaching at a tier 1 research institute, getting a job at a tier 1 research institution is difficult, and the odds are, I don't know, it's like 1 in 30 of you will get a job like that. It's not very good odds. So there's other jobs, like at liberal arts colleges, where they will very much evaluate your teaching skill, because that's the job. So, Jason?
Yes, ma'am. My suggestion to all my students is TA 1 semester at least, just to have the experience. I mean, in addition to being able to put that on your CV, you need to be able to have people skills, right? And talk to students and have discussions and be able to interact with different personalities and make all that work out. And especially if you want to be a successful PI, it's kind of like running a company. And you need to convince the funding agency that you know what you're doing. You're going to do the right things with the money, you're going to deliver results. It's like, being Steve Jobs or something. You really have to put on that hat and be able to turn it on. And also, keeping a class interested for 15 minutes is non-trivial. And you'll take some practice, things like that. But I think most of the hiring committees, teaching kind of rarely comes up, in most places. But once you become a faculty member, you get thrown into it, and you need to know what to do, sort of training by fire almost. So I think a little bit's good, but you're probably better off spending more of your effort on journal club presentations, March meeting talks, good scientific presentations, and getting good scientific results that you can share with the community.
Yeah, that touches on another topic, which is this training of giving good presentations. As a graduate student, for instance, you don't get much opportunity except for maybe some 10-minute talks at the March meeting or something like that, typically speaking. And then suddenly, let's say you go through a postdoc and maybe do a few more things like that. And then suddenly you have to give a job talk where you're going to be evaluated amongst the best in the field. And that's where it really matters, because your research talk and a job talk is the make or break. It really is. It's hugely important. So building this skill to be able to give a good presentation is enormously important. And there's some places it's easier to do that, some places it's harder. You just have to seek out ways to do that. Whether it's giving lots of group presentations, asking for feedback, taking a course. Sometimes there's graduate courses or something like that, where you can do this, get trained on how to give good talks, communications courses, something like that. So just think about that and keep in mind that it is very important. And that is the job interview, essentially, doing this job talk. showing yourself.
I would just add on, we've talked a lot about talking, but what about writing? I think, practicing your writing is so important if you want to be an academic, especially if they're, for any kind of position. You will be writing all the time, whether it's proposals or papers or emails or reports or anything. So just keep in mind and keep your writing skills sharp.
That's a great point. Are there resources for grad students to improve their writing, like online?
I don't know if online, but on campus, we definitely have some, at the graduate school, they provide writing boot camps and workshops.
So let me just second that point. I mean, I remember going into science thinking, well, I hate writing, it's like the most important skill that you will have. And the best course I took as a graduate student was this Saturday morning class in writing that they had at University of Chicago. And we didn't write about science, we just wrote about other things, but they taught you sort of rules of thumb for clear writing. And it made the biggest, you're always improving as a writer, you can always do better. But if you guys have the opportunity to take something like that, you should do it. It's worth it. I mean, you think you learn in high school or undergraduate, oh, well, here's how to write a 5-sentence paragraph. There's so much more to writing clearly and succinctly and effectively. It's worth it. Yeah, those Saturday mornings, I was glad to give them up for that in retrospect.
I think Elena mentioned applying for scholarships. That's a great way, because it really forces you to understand what's important, what to put down in a constrained amount of space, how to really make the points.
It also forces you to understand how to explain your research to someone who may be way outside of your field. It's the kind of thing that when you write it, you can show it to your mom, and you're like, can you read this? Which for most things that you write, you can't.
Right. And that kind of writing, you don't do much as a junior scientist, but believe that you will. Writing grant proposals, writing, you name it, recommendation letters, stuff like that. You need to really paraphrase things really well. And it's enormously important.
Just go pick up the literature. I mean, you can tell the difference between somebody who knows how to write and those who don't. And those who do, it's really a pleasure to read those kind of papers.
Other questions, other points? Yes?
Have you noticed a trend in hiring committees looking specifically for underrepresented groups as far as the LGBT or those that have disabilities of some kind? Or
Yeah, so the question is, in hiring committees, is there any trend in LGBT or disability to hire or give preference to this subgroup of applicants? I haven't seen it. In my experience, I would say the emphasis really is on underrepresented minorities, in physics, in particular females. That there's a huge deficit in the female gender in a lot of departments, in ours included. That's typically the main focus. Yes?
I have something to say about that, which is I think there are legal restrictions on what you can ask candidates in hiring. So I think like asking about sexual preference and things like that is actually illegal. So if like a candidate offers information, you can consider it, but I think on those particular groups, there can be some restrictions for that reason.
I see, okay.
I'll make one comment. There are a lot of women here that may or may not go on to academia and get faculty positions. I've heard from just colleagues that it's not uncommon, because you're female and because on a campus, let's say, there's a lot of committees and service work that needs to be done. Typically, committees want to have an equal representation. And so women tend to get asked much, much more than men to serve on committees and these kinds of things. And you can imagine if you're newly hired faculty, tenure track, when you're asked to serve on committees, you say yes, right? It's sort of the default mode, because you don't want to say no to people that might influence your tenure decision, et cetera, et cetera. Just keep that in mind and don't be afraid to say no, especially to being asked to serve on committees that are sort of campus-wide and not involving your department directly. And pay more attention to committees that do involve your department, where you're asked to serve on qualifiers and committees or something like that, that involve your colleagues, your peers in your department. Not only just because they might influence your tenure decision, but because these are the people you interact with. And so you can't say no to everything, but you have to be extra cautious about that, because you can easily get trapped in serving on dozens of committees, and it's a huge time sink.
So I'd actually sort of supplement that advice by suggesting that you find someone who you can consult about what you can say no to, and what, because you may not, as a starting faculty member, you might not know which is the, which are the ones that are, like, you shouldn't say no to, or the ones that are going to be really valuable. So, like, I had a sympathetic department chair who I could say, like, should I do this? And he'd say, no, or, yes, you must do this. Instead of trying to make that call myself. And that was pretty helpful.
Yeah, you gotta protect your time.
Right. You gotta say no, but
Almost never regret saying no.
But it's hard to say. It's hard to say no, but I'm pretty sure that it's okay. Like, it's someone that helps you. If you've gotten sort of an independent opinion that it's really okay to say no to this, right? Then you feel a lot better when you say no.
And always, I think, keep cultivating mentors, whether it's someone in your department, outside your department, in another university or national lab. There'll always, be people who can, consult with on these kind of questions or proposals, having them read those for you, papers, maybe you've written a paper that's not so great, so always keep that in mind.
So what about funding? Money. Anyone know what it costs to start up a lab? Anyone thought about that?
Where does startup fees normally come from? How much of it is grants that you get, when you're hired as a professor versus money the university gives you versus any other sources?
Yes.
I guess, like, do you have the money all set before you're hired or when you're hired, or do you spend that first few months or years building up the money to then actually get your lab
So
running?
99% of the time, new hires don't have any money from funding agencies like grants or anything like that. And you have to rely on the so-called startup package that you're offered when you're offered a job, which can range enormously from $2 million, plus dollars down to, I know in some cases at some small liberal arts colleges, people get $50,000, $100,000 to do set up some small research program. So you're given that money, and I think typically you're instructed to spend it in the first 3 years, or whatever short amount of time, because it's sort of like it's given a expiration date, which is kind of nonsense too. Typically, you should hold on to that money like it's your retirement package.
I used to think that too, but then I, was talking about this with somebody, and then the reason they do that, one reason to do that is that they really, the idea is you should be starting up, right? And you should be using that, and you should be deploying that in a way that's going to give you lift off.
Yeah,
At
absolutely.
the end of those 3 years, and if you're holding back because you want to kind of hoard or back in,
Yeah, you have to be very careful with that. I mean, all I'm saying is, I've seen the opposite where people spend all of their, like literally all of their money. And then when it comes to a rainy day, or a grant doesn't come through, or they need to replace a pump or something.
Yeah, yeah, you gotta.
They have no, you know, they can't do it.
But you have to, yes, you have to figure out how to get some kind of green day.
And money comes in different colors too. You know,
But,
typically, startup money is very flexible. You spend it on different things, and it's overhead free because it comes from overhead.
yeah, maybe in the startup negotiation, you can have something that you can explicitly negotiate some kind of longer term rainy day,
Yeah.
you know, provision.
Yeah, this is
but
kind of
it's-
been on
but-
the-
so that you can have that, you know, both the tree startup.
Yeah,
Think
so.
about that. Too late for you, maybe.
So let's sign away.
Yeah, that's the sort of things you learn, it's too late.
But yeah, so does that answer your question? So you typically you have money to spend on day one, or even before. Oftentimes, people will start to order equipment and so on, because equipment, as you know, can take months, if not a year, or years to come, like when you're ordering. And then typically, you know, you spend that money and your budget goes down, and then you supplement it with some grant funding that you start to apply for right away. Was it a hand up?
I just want to say, I guess there's a negotiation and startup and all that. I think it is not a bad idea to also consider the situation that we live in real world, right? There are universities that are obviously willing and interested in real work and want to negotiate. But I had also experience with universities that they said, this is the money, you want to get it, take it or leave it, right? So we are all obviously excited about the research that we want to do, right? But sometimes you have to also just look at the, you know, what is on the ground and what can you do and what are the options, and have to become really creative, I guess, at that young age. And instead of buying a new thing, maybe get a second-hand thing and try to rebuild it, and then as you go and bring money, try to update it. I mean, none of those things are bad in any ways, but you know, though, I think, you know, any amount of money is not enough. That's what you will find eventually. Sustainability is much better than having like a peak in money and then just, you know, decay out. If you can make it sustainable, then it will always go fast.
Yeah, I had this slide, I forgot. So this was, well, it was for NSF, but tips on funding, and this is again for targeted junior faculty, just starting faculty. So be patient. Odds are you will not get a grant for 2-3 years. And through that time, you will slowly learn the craft of how to write a successful grant proposal by advice and feedback and so on. Unfortunately, you know, like for instance, NSF, if you apply for an NSF grant, you write a 20-page proposal, all the stuff inside, you submit it, and 6 months later you get a review or a set of reviews back that say everything from this is the best proposal I've ever read to this is garbage, should never be funded by any agency. You know. And or, you know, often the more useful things are like the more technical reviews that say, you know, this is really good, but you have some problems here, and I don't understand this, and I don't understand that. Problem is you have no response. You just get that review, and that's it. And you know, maybe your funding or your proposal gets funded or it doesn't. If it doesn't, that's it. So you use this to feed into the next year's proposal, and so on. So it's a slow process. It takes time. What else is here? Program managers. So, you know, on day one, you should start thinking about talking to program managers to see what they're thinking about funding. They may or may not have influence in what gets funded. And there's a sort of scale for that I'm happy to talk to you if you want to. Get experience reviewing proposals. That's helpful because, especially NSF, the way you may or may not know, but NSF typically works on, they use panel reviews. So that means you submit a proposal and it gets reviewed by a panel of people that meet over 2 days or something. Each person like me would review these days 10 proposals. And then they get together and hash out sort of a priority list out of 30 submitted proposals, let's say 5 of them or 10 get funded. And to participate in that, you immediately, over 2 days, see this enormous cross-section of different qualities of proposal and what's in and you see what the panel comments on, what they think is important and so on. So it's a tremendously useful experience. Up to date on opportunities. So sometimes, grant opportunities show up very quickly and you have to jump on it. This has been particularly important the last year or so, with a lot of quantum stuff coming out. Very short fuses, you have to submit, become part of a team, and so on. Follow the instructions. So I'm sure I'm not the only person in this room that has submitted a proposal and got it kicked back because of some syntax problem in the proposal. There's very strict guidelines, like what font you use, what's your bibliography format. We had one kicked back from DOE just this past fall for a $20 million proposal because it was missing some documents. So, yeah, and there's typically resources on campuses that help you review that, or personnel in your department that can help you. And if that's not there, at least get a colleague to sort of check over it. Give yourself extra time to write them. This applies to everything, not just proposals. Be aware of your audience. When you're giving a talk, you're writing a grant proposal, scholarship proposal. You got to try to envision who's reading your proposal, who's reviewing it, and what are they looking for. And that's how you form what you're saying. Anything else doesn't matter. If you did some great science and you write about it, but they don't care about that, they want to know what's your diversity and what's your vision and so on, and then you miss the point. So you have to really be aware of your audience. If you're a talk, if you're a lecture, writing a proposal, writing a paper, etc. Okay, so that's my slide. Any other comments, questions? John?
So, piece of advice on writing a proposal, make sure that the reviewer actually knows what you want to do. I've read lots of proposals where they sort of wax on for page after page about the literature and then at the end, and we'll do X. It's like 2 sentences. It's not enough, and I hate those proposals because then I have no idea if they really know what they want to do. So I think it's, in my opinion, maybe others will have a different one, it's much better to sort of have a ratio of about 1/3 to 2/3. Sort of 1/3 that says like what you've done and why this is important, and 2/3 about exactly what you're going to do, so that people can actually understand what you're thinking about and judge it, not trying to have to guess. And so, just a rule of thumb, I think it's sort of 1/3, 2/3.
True also for job application.
Pardon?
True also for job application. Maybe not that exact ratio.
Is there any solution on how to build a network with these program managers?
You simply should contact them, and I know it's hard to even get a response from someone. But you just have to be persistent and, arrange a time to meet them. So we're lucky because we can take a metro train to Arlington or something and see people around here. But if you're from elsewhere and you're visiting DC area, take the opportunity to try to make an appointment.
They go to meetings also.
Yeah, that's true.
Just remember, it's their job to give out money, right? It's their job to give out money, so they don't mind talking to people, and they know people need resources. Yeah, so they're okay with that. You don't have to feel bad about asking them for money.
How many how many here are graduate students? Almost everyone. Postdocs? So I'm just curious here, what do you think is the most important thing you should be doing as a graduate student? Yes?
Research?
What kind of research?
But you want your project to start from the end of your 4 years, 3 years, want to you have a paper that's done, then afterwards, during that process, think about what you want to do next, you want to do a postdoc, you want to go to the industry, basically. That's why you're here.
And maybe just to add, so finishing your research is
Yeah.
completing.
Completing something.
Yeah.
I think we should have three things. Learn some skills, publish data, and have some kind of original idea.
Original idea. Yeah.
Mm.
Great. Any other thoughts? What kind of skills do you think you should pick up and take with you?
Writing.
Writing, yes.
Well, writing, but also communication, how to give a, well, we talk about how to give a good presentation, how to make it interesting, how to, it's all the same thing, advertising, all in communication. And sometimes in our PhD path, there's a lack in the communication skills and transmission of the communication skills.
And that sort of follows in a postdoc.
Yeah, and afterwards, and
Really hone your
professors-
skills. Any other thoughts, grad students?
Surviving.
Figuring out what's worth spending your time on in
Yep.
research and in other things.
Efficiency, optimization.
Work-life balance.
Yep.
Trying to make connection with others.
Connection with, like networking.
Yeah.
Also working on a team, how to, how to accomplish tasks, whether you like people or not. People are people. There's another. Okay, how about postdocs? What's the most important thing?
Networking
Networking?
and advertisement.
Yeah.
It's one of these. I don't think that there is the most important.
No, I'm just,
Results.
I think first author publications are incredibly important for both students and postdocs.
Postdocs is hard. When you're a postdoc, it's very difficult. You have a very short amount of time that you actually need to do something. Networking by itself is not going to give you the job. That's not the scary thing. You should always be aware of that.
Say something.
Sure.
I think that the best, I'm not doing a faculty myself, but I think the best part of life is being the postdoc in academia. As a graduate student, you are surviving, you are trying to take courses and catch up with science and all that. And you become a new faculty, you see all these new things that you have to think about. So in postdocs, that's the only time you are given to do the research that you are excited about and to do it. So choose wisely and spend your time. Don't be under pressure. Just, that's the only good time that is purely research and you can do what you can do. And the results and all that, it depends on the topic and how things went and all that. Obviously you want to work hard toward it, but you don't want to be under stress or start doing other things that you're not supposed to do, right? Just enjoy that time with it.
So just to finish, they say that grad school is the snooze button of life. And in your postdoc, you have to wake up. Okay, any other final comments or thoughts or questions?
So I have questions.
Yes.
Especially for maybe John and David. So what's the job security in national labs, especially for the junior staff?
It depends on who's funding you. If you're PES funded, which is a basic research, job security is excellent. But there are other programs at the national lab where the money is going up and down. The job security isn't as good.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, but what you should, there should be something dispelled here that, I mean, we write proposals, and to BES, we write a proposal every 3 years. And we submit it, and we have site visits with panels, Karen's been fortunately, you get the A-team like her, and that's what you want. But it's strenuous, it's stressful, and If they decide they're not going to continue your project, it's done. And they close it 3 months later, and you don't have tenure. So then you're in trouble. So yes, as long as you're doing well, there is no better funding than DOE BES money at the National Lab. I totally believe that. But it can be gone in a step function too. So
Yeah, labs are high-pressure places nowadays. There's a lot of pressure on the
it's
lab.
not a sinecure at the
Lab
lab.
scientists, yeah, no, there's a lot of pressure.
And I work at well, the DOE likes to call everything national labs. I work at NIST, and I'm not working at NIST right now. Okay, we're subject.
He's not here either.
You're not working, so I'm saying.
Right, so we're also subject to the whims of the government. Things that are well outside of our control.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing. Funding is, yeah, I mean, even in the universities, there's so-called soft money, where you know, the campus budget might find in the scientist position or something like that. But typically, people are paid for soft money, which means from grants. And that can come and go. It's not an easy life, but it's fun. The reason we wake up in the mornings to see the data, that's why we're all here. All right, so with that, let's go to the lounge.